Welcome to Rising Up for Justice, a special weekly series presented by Rising Up with Sonali, an independently produced, subscriber-supported program syndicated to radio stations, free speech TV, and podcast platforms. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer. Our nation and our world is overrun by billionaires and bigots, but they are few and we are many. On this series, exclusive to subscribers of Rising Up with Sonali and viewers of Free Speech TV, we'll hear from organizers in the movements for social justice. And we'll dig into the nuts and bolts of values, strategies, tactics, narratives, and building power. Joining us this week is Dr. Van Bailey, an award-winning educator and advocate for transgender youth. They serve as the Family Resources Manager at Campaign for Southern Equality, where they provide patient navigation for the Trans Youth Emergency Project. Welcome to the program, Dr. Bailey.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me.
So tell us about your organization. For those of us outside of the South, many of us might be unfamiliar with it. There is the Campaign for Southern Equality, and within that, a specific project that we'll be focusing on today, the Trans Youth Emergency Project. Tell me about both.
Yeah, so at the Campaign for Southern Equality, we're an organization that's fighting for a future where all LGBTQ plus Southerners can really thrive. Through our specific program at the Trans Youth Emergency Project, we respond to one of the most urgent crises facing transgender youth today, which is state level bans on gender affirming care. So these harmful laws are basically being forced on families and where they have to travel hundreds of miles just to access basic health care. And so through the project, which we call TYEP, we're working to ensure transgender youth and their families can live with dignity, safety, and access to health care that they need. So TYEP actually offers direct support through what we call patient navigation, which is one-on-one tailored services for those families. We provide emergency grants and a national network of care. And so since TIEP has launched in March 2023, we've been able to distribute over $650,000 in emergency aid to more than 1,200 families across 27 states. And we've expanded nationwide. So our goal is really to ensure that no family having to navigate this crisis really has to do it alone.
And so, tie up the Trans Youth Emergency Project. How necessary are its services right now? It's a relatively new project, as you said, 2023. And I imagine that's directly in response to the incredible attacks on transgender people, but specifically young people by the GOP, by the rising conservative movement, and of course by Donald Trump. Is that correct?
Correct. So right now we see this need as incredibly urgent. One of our things is making sure that everybody has access to healthcare, and that includes youth, regardless if they're trans or not. But we know that specifically this kind of political attacks that are happening are specifically against transgender people and specifically youth. And so for us, what we're trying to ensure is that no matter who you are, you have access to healthcare, and that you actually, have a sense of your own bodily autonomy, and families can make decisions on their own when it comes to their own healthcare needs.
How severely are people being impacted right now? I mean, we are hearing about these bans. Can you give me a sense of the stories of young people in particular who are directly impacted by the bans on gender affirming care, and just even not just physically but even mentally, living in a place where you are told that your very existence is antithetical to the local government?
Right. So for us, the stories of trans youth and their families are really at the heart of our work. We know that parents are doing everything in their power to care for their children, and trans youth are showing remarkable courage, really just to be themselves. And so, what we try to do is elevate these voices through national media, through social media, and advocacy campaigns. In fact, We're also sharing stories in a book written by members of our Campaign for Southern Equality team, which is called Trans Kids Are Kids. And it really is deeply personal. It's hopeful, and it really is an urgent collection of experiences from the front lines of this crisis. What we know is that these stories are really our strongest tool of showing that there's real human impact when it comes to anti-trans laws and encouraging people to just stop and put themselves into the shoes of families that are impacted. What we know in this country is that many people don't know trans folks, right, personally. And so putting this book out there really allows those narratives to come forth and also really personalizes this so people can actually understand what the impact is when it comes to these healthcare bans.
And since we are already talking about narrative, let's focus on that a little bit more because that's a really important aspect, right? Because narratives shape culture, culture shapes policies. And it seems as though, especially when it comes to conservative voters and legislators, that until they are personally impacted, it's really hard for them to put themselves in people's shoes. But that shouldn't be a requirement, right? So you do see exceptions where there are people who have who conservative values and then find out that their own kid is struggling with whatever issue, and it could be their sexuality, sexual orientation, and their gender identity. And then they change their approach because, of course, the love for their own child comes first and foremost if they're a good parent. And they might then have their mind changed. But I'm wondering, isn't it a huge challenge for the work that you do, that you have to rely on people having direct experience in order to feel empathy for trans youth?
Yeah. And I really appreciate that you're bringing up challenges, right? Because, really our challenges are kind of twofold, right? Physically, we know that we're kind of in the reality of geography when it comes to working with trans youth. And right now, 27 states have passed these bans, right? So when you're talking about the impact and people really feeling these things, more than half of our country is passing these bans. And in many places, the nearest affirming provider really might be hundreds of miles away from folks. And there might be just too far and few like providers available, and they're overwhelmed by that demand, right? And so, what I'm asking people to do is to, while there's this attack on empathy, is to really think about what if you didn't have basic health care for your child, period, right? And what would that necessarily mean for you? How would you go about navigating that? Many of our issues are intersectional in nature, right? And so what we're seeing is the same attacks that are happening on when it comes to reproductive justice or when it comes to immigration, things like that are exactly what's happening when it comes to gender affirming care. And so what we try to do is connect people to providers when they're available. And right now they're really overwhelmed by the demand. Uh, One of the challenges that I can also address is culturally, we understand that this is a coordinated political attack. These bans are a part of a larger effort to really undermine bodily autonomy and demonize trans people, especially trans youth who don't have a lot of agency themselves. So the misinformation right now is loud, it's very dangerous, and far too often families are isolated, they're scared, and they're really unsure where to turn. And that is exactly why TYEP is here.
In thinking about the challenges facing trans kids, so much of the rights attacks are couched in caring for these kids and protecting them from abusive parents and the LGBTQ agenda, etc. Right? They couch the taking away of gender affirming care as protecting children. And I'm wondering if you can address how to overcome that, how that narrative challenge in particular is met. I'm thinking of the times when there are parents of trans kids who seem to be some of the best advocates when it comes to thinking about the needs of trans kids. Occasionally you see a parent of a trans kid very courageously speaking up at local city council meetings, or places where testimonies are being shared on bans. And those seem to often be really, really effective or moving. Is that one way to challenge this narrative that the bans are just there to protect children, when of course they're doing the opposite?
Well, that's one of the things that we're talking about when it comes to a coordinated political attack. That is one of the main agendas that people are trying to put this false narrative out there that they have the best interest of the child. But it's not grounded in fact, especially when it comes to providing medical care for children. What we know is that when children are in affirming homes, when they have access to their basic needs like healthcare, when they have affirming homes, when they're surrounded by older people who support them, they're only going to thrive and it's only going to assist in their life expectations, excuse me, their when it comes to their own lives, right? And so for me, one of the things that I think about is when we challenge these narratives, let's ground it in fact. Let's make sure that we're actually talking to the parents who are dealing with these issues on the front lines and not filling in these narratives that might be coming from, kind of the corners of the internet and things like that. We know that when it comes to medical care, gender affirming care saves lives, and that's for youth as well. And one of the things that I really appreciate about patient navigation is being able to see the changes that happen when it comes to how happy our youth are once they're able to get care, right? We hear these narratives beforehand that children are facing depression, self-harming tactics, isolation, all of these things. And then as soon as they're able to get linked with the provider, they are able to really see themselves and to be able to thrive, right? And that's really when people talk about the agenda, I say, well, our only agenda is to live, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's when it one of the most things important things that I think that we can continue to share is that who doesn't want to have a long, fulfilled life in which you can really be your true and authentic self? And so when you think about our agenda, particularly us as trans folks, particularly folks who are trans youth, it is really the agenda is to live and to thrive and to hopefully grow old. That's it.
In addition to the narrative work to achieve your goals, how does TYEP actually ensure that those people who are being denied care actually receive the care? You mentioned that funding is a big part of it, and distributing funds to families.
Yes, absolutely. So when it comes to achieving our goals, we have kind of short and long-term goals. The first one is when it comes to our short-term goals, we try to provide immediate relief. Our team offers this personalized support through one-on-one navigation calls and financial assistance for travel. So families can access care even when forced to cross state lines, right? So we provide the grants. We also provide this personalized navigation, and then we leave it up to the families to utilize those funds to travel as they need to. Long term, what we're trying to do is really build a sustainable, scalable infrastructure of care and support. And we're also trying to shift the narrative when it comes to advocating for policy change, uplifting family voices, and really trying to ensure that the public understands that trans youth deserve access to life saving healthcare in their own communities. So that's kind of the long term goal, but really getting funds to people because we know that traveling, particularly for those folks who have to go multiple states over or have to drive hours or take several flights, becomes very expensive, right? And so, really providing these travel grants is a way for us to meet an immediate need while also connecting them to our network of care so they know that they have a kind of this place of support that they can always return back to.
Right, and just like reproductive care, you can't wait if you need care, if you need gender affirming care. it can be a matter of life and death, right? Especially for young people who might be struggling. And so getting those funds, I imagine that's part of the sort of short term work that you're doing. So how to overturn the bans that are already in place? Let's talk about that aspect of it. And it's a huge question because, of course, we already know that the Supreme Court is basically in Trump's hands. They seem to be over and over giving him wins, sometimes even without explaining their logics. He's appointed 3 out of the 6 conservatives, and there are 6 out of 9 who are ultra conservatives on the Supreme Court. How is TYEP, how is this Project for Southern Equality aiming to roll back the legislative bans on care for trans kids?
Really, for us, it's really about meeting people on the ground who are doing this work, right? So one of the things that we try to do is uplift the stories of trans youth and their families, whether that's on social media and or personally within communities. We're going out literally to go speak to whoever who will listen to us, including showing up in, school districts, showing up on panels, literally having conversations with some of our folks who are doing the legal work that is required, to really battle these bans. But really, it's about us trying to overall connect it to a broader movement as it relates to health equity, as it relates to racial justice, as it relates to bodily autonomy, and overall LGBTQ plus liberation, right? This issue is not in isolation of these particular other movements, right? So what we know is that the same political forces that are attacking gender affirming care are also going after reproductive freedom. They're also going after racial justice, and they're also going after immigrant rights. So it's really important for us to be in partnership and coalition with other movements and making sure that people understand that just because they're coming for my rights doesn't mean that they're not coming for yours as well. How do we talk about this as not a single issue, but an issue that impacts us all, whether or not you identify as trans or not? And so what we see is we have very natural allies who are in reproductive justice organizations, racial justice movements, disability justice advocates, and they're all working to protect access to healthcare and personal and bodily autonomy. And so being able to link up with these orgs to be able to make sure that we have a multi-pronged agenda and making sure that we are on the ground and doing the grassroots work that is absolutely necessary for us to ensure that people understand that just because you're not trans doesn't mean that you're not impacted. Let's look at what they're doing as it relates to folks who are trying to fight for reproductive justice, for instance, people who are trying to fight for reproductive rights, who are trying to fight for immigration rights. It is literally a cut and paste kind of attack that is happening. And once we get people to understand that this is not in isolation, we are doing our best to continue to build a coalition to ensure that we're not working in silos because this fight affects us all.
I so appreciate that combining, that intersectionality that exists, because you're right. It's such a cookie cutter approach to all of these different aspects that do impact us all. And when you get through all of those things you were naming, reproductive justice, trans care, gender affirming care for trans kids, immigrant rights, racial justice, you've covered like a huge portion of America and immigrants, etc. Of course, which these days is the attacks have really skyrocketed, and there are so many individuals who exist in these intersections, in these places where so many of these identities overlap, and it can be terrifying and scary. And I'm wondering if you can also point to the fact that there is, or at least address this issue, that we seem to very easily separate ourselves from the larger world around us. And this is a very big question, I know. Our society is so has such a strong emphasis on individualism as opposed to collectivism. But thinking about collective well-being is how we move forward, and yet over and over our culture, the narratives in our culture lift up individualism. And so people end up voting for billionaires to get tax breaks because they see that as somehow being in their best interest, because it puts forward this narrative of survival of the fittest. You're out, everyone's for themselves, etc. Do you see that big picture issue is one that frames your work as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Like for us, we know that none of this happens in isolation. First of all, I am a Black trans individual, right? And I tell people all the time that there is no way that I can separate my Blackness from me being trans as well, right? Because when I go into a doctor's office, including our youth and folks like that, they are going to treat me as it relates to all of my social identities. And I think you make a very good point, right? We are in a country that promotes individualism, and that is on purpose, right? They don't want us to feel connected to one another because they know power in numbers. It's easier to attack 1% and get people to say they're the enemy rather than thinking about, if you look at some of these bills, in fact, there's so much that's tied into them that people are like, oh, wait, I didn't know that they're also thinking about cutting Medicaid. I didn't know that they're also thinking about going after birth control. And I'm like, yeah, it's all in the same bill. So you're
Hmm.
thinking that this is just about trans people, and it's not, right? Let's actually roll it back and look at how they are going about these attacks, because the attacks are not around individualism. It's really about canning these things and then putting out a narrative that says, oh no, the trans folks are bad. But it's like, in fact, this is all about bodily autonomy. This is all about racial identity and things like that. This is about class as well. And so the more that we can bring up things that are not just about people's own kind of experience, but also understanding that people have many different social identities that they have to navigate, and they're all going to be impacted when it comes to the system of healthcare. There is no way that you are going to be able to uh, negate the fact that you might be an expecting mother who might also have to make certain considerations as it relates to your race, your gender, your class, all of that. And so the more that we can really bring forth the narratives around truth telling and around how these bills are targeting more than just trans people, but really this kind of idea of bodily autonomy, that's important too. I also think that it's very important that we talk about gender affirming care as it relates to, it's not just about trans people. We all have to navigate gender affirming care in some sense, right? The same way in which people have to go and get hormones should you stop producing hormones or it kind of lessens in your body, is gender affirming care. The same way that people are out there, getting certain surgeries that promote and assist maybe in weight loss and things like that, gender affirming care. So I
Reconstructive
think we
surgery
need to
after
be
cancer if you've
yeah,
gotten mastectomy.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think when people begin to think about the ways in which they're accessing gender affirming care all the time, we have to begin to make it not about the trans issue, but really about understanding how healthcare is beneficial for all, regardless of where you're at on the gender spectrum.
Dr. Bailey, what do you need from progressive minded people around the country, from our viewers, from those who want to support and be in solidarity with the work that you're doing? How can people get involved, whether they're, in the South or
Absolutely.
not?
Yeah, yeah. This is a national movement, right? So first we need you to speak up, right? We need advocates, we need allies, we need accomplices, we need folks to advocate for trans youth. The second thing I could say is that to share our resources, right? You know, you are definitely welcome to come to transyouthemergencyproject.org and really learn more about the resources that we have out there. Next, we need to challenge these harmful narratives when you hear them. Oftentimes, people are not speaking up in the moment. They might need time to process, they might not know how to challenge it. But I think it's important to really begin to educate ourselves on ways in which we can challenge those narratives as soon as we hear them, and then support the families that are really on the front lines trying to navigate gender affirming care for their child every day. So, ways in which that folks can get involved when it comes to the Trans Youth Emergency Project, you're definitely welcome to donate to us. Every dollar goes directly to a family that's navigating this crisis. You can share our work. Which means uplifting the stories of trans youth and their families, like on our social media platform and in your communities. Please invite us to speak, whether that is your faith group or workplace or school. We're ready to really present about the crisis and what you can actually do. And then please connect us, right? We know that a network of care is necessary for really being able to support the families who are on the front lines. And so connect us, introduce us to people, businesses, foundations who are really ready to support this work.
I love that, especially in terms of the personal work that people can get involved in. Whether or not we realize it, probably every single one of us knows somebody who is related to or cares for or loves a transgender person, and or themselves has gotten gender affirming care, and that universality of that, I think, is so critical to it. Thank you so much. Give out the best websites where people can find out about this, and get the places they can donate, and maybe sign up to a mailing list.
Yes, absolutely. So you can go to www.transyouthemergencyproject.org/donate. You can also just go to transyouthemergencyproject.org. We have a ton of resources there, which also includes information on specifically folks who are looking for support as it relates to finding a provider and or getting a travel grant. You just have to fill out an application and it'll come right to our team, and somebody will follow up with you shortly to ensure that you're connected to our team.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Good luck to you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
My guest has been Dr. Van Bailey, an award-winning educator and advocate for transgender youth. They serve as the Family Resources Manager at Campaign for Southern Equality, where they provide patient navigation for the Trans Youth Emergency Project, or TYEP. This is Rising Up for Justice, and I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of this new weekly half-hour series, exclusive to viewers of Free Speech TV and subscribers of my long-standing program, Rising Up with Sonali. You can find out more at risingupwithsonali.com.